So good to see you this morning. I hope you're doing well. It's a blessing to be here. We were all allowed to wake up this morning, weren't we? On Wednesday evenings, we've been studying in the book of Hebrews. And Wednesday night, we discussed this verse, and I'm not done talking about it. So I don't think we'll go as long as we did Wednesday night, but it was a good discussion. And there's so much in this verse. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. See that picture in the background? My dad grabbed me like that one day when I was coming up from falling in the lake at Standing Stone State Park. And I didn't know how to swim. And he reached down and grabbed my arm when it broke the water and yanked me up on the dry deck. And I was ever thankful. I'll never forget the feeling of that moment of being safe and relieved and no longer having to worry what was going to happen. It was a good feeling. I think so many times as Christians we become discouraged and we get pushed out. We feel like maybe we don't belong anymore. When you're part of the family, you're part of the family. God's never going to give up on you. He's going to continue to seek you out, to look for you. I see Mike Rayburn back there in the back. Good morning, Mike. We're glad you're here. What a blessing, an answer to prayer. Thank you, Lord. He will never stop looking and pursuing and loving and coaxing. He cares about you that much. He will leave nothing undone in your life. That's how he loves us. And do we deserve it? Absolutely not. No, sir. As a matter of fact, a lot of us are still pushing back. You know, don't get too close to me, God. I want what you have to offer, but I still don't want to be that close. And so we stay at a distance. Some of us want to be right there with him at all times. And that is our desire. But we encounter things in this world that we feel like keep us away from him and make us feel like maybe he doesn't approve of who we are anymore. You know, sometimes I become upset at my children, but they're still my children, and I still love them. Do I want them to do differently? Do I want them to live better? Absolutely. But I'm never, ever going to give up on them. And neither will he with us. And that brings us to three things I want to talk about this morning. The first of which, God is at work. He hadn't quit working yet. Yeah, he created the earth. He brought a lot of things into being. He brought Jesus into this world, who lived a perfect life, was crucified on the cross at Golgotha, buried, rose again, and ever lives on our behalf. But God's not through working. He's still at work. When they asked Jesus, when the woman at the well had been talking to Jesus in John chapter 4, and the disciples came back and they wondered about his talking to this strange woman. After all, she was a Samaritan, and the Jews and the Samaritans don't have a lot of dealings. And he had sent them into town to buy food, and they came back with food. And so their response was, Lord, here, take some food. And Jesus said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Jesus was working then, and he's working now. If you go a little bit further in John chapter 5, Jesus was in a discussion with the Pharisees, and he answered them, my Father, and it was over healing a man on the Sabbath, by the way. He said, my Father is working until now, and I also am working. In other words, God didn't just sit down and fold his arms after creation. He's still at work. He's working on me. He's working on you, making you into and forging within your life the plans and the purpose and the accomplishments that he has mapped out for you. It's very detailed. You'll never in this life get to see the plans, but they're there, and they're grand, and they're just for you. So that's what he's doing. John chapter 6, another discussion with the Pharisees in verse 28 and 29. And they said to him, what must we do to be working the works of God? And Jesus said, this is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he hath sent. You see, if God can work in your life and get you to a point of faith, that's where he wants you to be. That's where he needs you to be, to begin what he has planned for you, to get you to a place to where you're willing to trust him with everything that's going on in your life. Some of you have come here this morning and you've brought with you a whole bag of things, maybe some of which you're ashamed of. Maybe you came here with a lack of faith this morning. That's okay. What better place could you be? Maybe you've decided to give up on prayer because there's this one family member that you've prayed and you've prayed and you've prayed, and you're so discouraged because you don't see what's going on. I've got people like that in my family. I sometimes feel like giving up. I got news yesterday. My nephew that did so good in rehab a few years ago, 2 years ago, and then once he got out, was out for about a month and immediately went back to prison, is going back to rehab. I am so proud of him. I'm so proud that he's willing to step out in his faith, be it whatever it is, to make this improvement in his life. That's where God wants us all to be. Unwilling to take no for an answer and to continue to reach out to him, knowing that he is working in our lives, trying to bring about the things that we need to happen on our behalf. And he is working. He is doing those things. Another passage that I want us to look at before we move on is over in Acts chapter 13. If you want to turn over there really quickly. In Acts 13 and in verse 41, Jesus had spent all this time here on the earth, had schooled his disciples, had died, had risen, had ascended, and was still at work in a man's life named Saul of Tarsus. Was still at work in the lives of his apostles. In chapter 13, in verse 41, quoting from the Old Testament, says, "Look, you scoffers, be astounded and perish, for I am doing a work in your days, a work that you will not believe, even if one tells it to you." And they went out. The people begged that these things might be told them the next Sabbath. Maybe you've come here this morning and you thought you were so broken that God couldn't do anything in your life. You'd be wrong about that. But sometimes we get to feeling that way. So you might ask, what type of work is he willing to do? There's several things I want to point out to you this morning. Number one, he's looking for you. Number two, he wants to bring healing to your life. Number three, he wants to restore you back to the place to where he would like for you to be. And number four, he wants to bring to completion everything he has planned in your life. That's a pretty deep list, isn't it? Let's look at those things. In Luke chapter 19 and verse 1, Jesus said to those who were listening to him, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost." Do you have any idea where he was at that time? He was at the house of Zacchaeus, a tax collector. We love those guys, don't we? Just this past week, I finished my tax return for the last year. Got it turned in. It got accepted. I'm so excited. But for all this time, I've been nervous and anxious and, not knowing how everything was going to turn out. And it all turned out well. But Zacchaeus, he had to feel that he was a betrayer of his own countrymen. After all, he worked for the Roman government. A lot of times those guys would take more money than was really owed with threats. Well, you either pay me or this guy over here with the sword's going to come visit your family. So what's it going to be? Zacchaeus turned to Christ in faith. And Jesus said, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost." He came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He came for you. He came for me. Maybe you've abused every known substance to man. I've got friends like that. They've smoked, snorted, sniffed, injected, whatever you can think of, away, huffed. They've done it all. And they've been redeemed. God's at work. He's looking. He's looking for someone just like you. Someone to bring to a place of healing in their life. Listen at the words of Isaiah 53:5, written hundreds of years before Jesus was ever born. This was written about him, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and by his stripes we are healed. That entire passage there in Isaiah 53 is talking about the life of Jesus and all that he went through on our behalf. He took the punishment for everything that you and I have done that's wrong. Maybe you're involved in some kind of sexual sin in your life. And you're thinking, man, if everybody knew about this, my life would be over. God knows. He's still looking for you. He still loves you. He still wants to bring healing in your life, to correct the mistakes that we've made. You see, we are not born with an eraser. We can make marks throughout history and throughout the days of our lives on the scale of time that we call life. But we can't go back and undo the things that have been done, whatever they are. Jesus has a way of blotting them out. And so when the record is read before the King of Kings, it's redacted. I like that. There's sections missing in there because they've been blotted out with the blood of God's only Son. They don't exist anymore. They've been taken away. He wants to restore our lives. Jeremiah 29, beginning at verse 11, Jeremiah writes to the Jewish people who are about to go into exile. They're about to be carried away. As far as we know, Jeremiah never had one convert to turn back and follow God. He is known as the weeping prophet. Here's words of hope that he had for a group of people that were called stiff-necked and unrepentant. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for good and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me, and you will find me. When you seek me with all of your heart, I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you. Have you ever felt so lost you didn't think you would ever find your way back? That's a bad feeling, isn't it? It's a terrible place to be. But a lot of people feel that way. They feel so broken, so rejected. Jeremiah says God has a promise for you. He wants to restore you back to where He planned for you to be all along. He wants to bring you back off the path that you've strayed from. He wants to make everything right in your life that's been messed up. And He's the only one that can do it. That restoration. Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. The words of a man who felt that he was chief of sinners. This is what he had to say. I am sure of this. Have you ever been sure about anything? Paul says, I'm sure about this. That he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it at the day of Jesus Christ. There's not going to be anything left undone that He can't do. That's how He loves us. He's looking for us. His desire is to bring healing and restoration and to finish what He started. Not to leave anything undone in our lives. Can you imagine a life lived like that? And you may have an excuse of saying, yeah, but you don't know. I don't need to know. God knows. He's the one that made these promises, not me. And I am convinced that He'll make good on them if you'll come to Him. You see, the passage that we read earlier in Hebrews 7 was He is able to save to the uttermost those that come to God through Him. That's what He does. He specializes in hard cases just like yours, just like mine. And He's good at what He does. He's the best. There never has been one better, and there never will be. My last point today is this one. His active present work. We talked about this Wednesday night. Yeah, I know Jesus and God have done things in the past, but what are they doing now? Hebrews 20, verse 25 in chapter 7 says, He ever lives to make intercession for you. At this moment, Jesus is interceding for you right now. And when you get up in the morning, He'll be doing it again. When you go to bed tonight, He'll still be doing it. Interceding for you. Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 8. Paul goes through a long list of things in Romans 8. It's quite a passage. We won't read it all. But in this chapter, in verse 34, he goes, Who is there to condemn you? Christ is the one who died. More than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. See, Paul believed that even now, as you sit here this morning, your name is being brought up before the Father. Father, I paid for their sins. Lord, I see what they're going through right now. But I paid for that too. I want you to remember what I did on their behalf. See, sometimes we feel like we've tripped and fallen so much that we've used up all the opportunities that have ever been offered in our life. Colossians chapter 1 verse 13 says, He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of His beloved Son. The King James Version says, translated. The wording there in the Greek is like a big old bear hug. Used to work with a boy that we referred to as Baby Huey. He was stout. If we needed something lifted or tugged or pulled on, he was the guy that was elected. And he always enjoyed walking up behind me and grabbing me by surprise and squeezing until I felt like my internal organs were going to come out every orifice in my body. And then he would say, I love you. Yeah. Sometimes love hurts, doesn't it? That one did. Those are the hugs that you want to push away from. This verse in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 3 says He's delivered us from the domain of darkness. And He's picked us up and put us in a different position. A position we didn't have before. It's in His kingdom right now. That's where you are. That's where I am. Not because of this building, but it is the spiritual abode of who we are. We're God's people. You see, He ever lives to make intercession for you and for me. That's what He does. He saves to the uttermost. Satan may have tripped you up, caused you to stumble in your faith, maybe with some kind of substance abuse, some kind of sexual sin. Maybe you've become involved in embezzling money where you work. I don't know what your sin is. But I know this. I know we all struggle in this life to be the people that God wants us to be. And I know that Jesus alone is the answer to our problems. And that even now, as you're sitting there with as little faith as you may think you have, He is able to save to the uttermost those that come to God through Him, if you'll be willing to come. He's made a simple plan. For those that have never obeyed the gospel, He's asked us to come to Him with our faith, confessing Him as the Son of God, the only one who's worthy to save us, repenting of how we've lived our lives, and being baptized in water for the remission of sins. And then He does something special. He fills us with the gift of His Spirit so that we can walk in Him with faith. Faith that's not of ourselves. He wants us to live that way. And sometimes as Christians we do fall and trip and stumble, and we need help. I don't know about you, but that's why I'm here this morning. I need you. You encourage me. Sometimes I get up in the mornings and I'm weak. I need God's family. You need God's family. And sometimes we need to pray for each other because we need healing. We need strengthening. And if that's you this morning, if you need Him in any way, the door of God's invitation is always open. Not just when we sing the song on Sunday morning, but 24/7. We encourage you to come, even as we stand and sing this song.